Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's Substack Live at the Sustainable Media Center. My name is Emma Lemke, and I serve as the Director of Gen Z Advocacy at SMC. And I am so excited to be joined in intergenerational dialogue today with SMC community members Laura Galinsky and Zachary Severin. A little bit more about today's conversation list. Laura is truly a force to be reckoned with in the purpose and social innovation space. She's dedicated her life to leadership, systems change, and the art of connection, all important pillars in her work as the head of partnerships at Project Liberty and in her work as the founder and executive coach at The Genuine. The through line, however, through all of this work is her desire to build partnerships and networks as living systems, something we will talk a lot about in today's conversation. In addition to her work at Project Liberty, Laura is the SMC advisory board member. So we want to just thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure. Happy to be here.
And in addition, we also have a spectacular young person, Zachary Severin, joining us in today's conversation. Zachary is the founder of Youth United, a national nonpartisan youth policy and mobilization organization in Canada. He was a past fellow at McGill's Center for Media, Technology, and Democracy and a Canadian advisor to Design It For Us, a past Project Liberty contributor, and currently he works in Ottawa under Canada's Parliamentary Secretary for AI and Digital Innovation. So thank you for jumping on it today as well, Zach.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Emma.
So, for today's discussion, there is a lot that I want to unpack, but at the heart of the conversation is this idea of coalition building and partnership in the tech advocacy space. But before I jump in, let's let listeners in kind of on how you both got to this point in your individual work, advocating for better digital status quos. So, starting with you, Laura, and moving to Zach, talk us through your work in the space via Project Liberty and Youth United, and how exactly you got here in the first place. Was it passion? Was it circumstance? A mix of the two? Just walk us through it.
Great question. I love finding out people's paths because they're almost never a straight and narrow. um, they are a squiggly lines and two steps forward, three steps back, left turns, right turns, cliffs, all sorts of analogies there. So my work has always sat at the intersection of systems change, leadership development, identity development, entrepreneurship, human agency, and my path has led me to that those sweet spots in the tech space. But I've always been a generalist,
Mhm.
so I have been blessed to work for organizations that were kind of field building, for example, in social entrepreneurship, social innovation. So it's issue area agnostic. It was like bring the best ideas, bring the highest potential leaders to the fore. And my work through multiple organizations was just to like back the heck out of people, right? Just to support them, help them go further, faster, develop communities and coalitions and networks and collaborations around them. Um, and I love that work because I just believe one, no one does anything alone, and then two, um, that we need kind of the connective tissue type of organizations that really accelerates systems
Mhm.
change. And at Project Liberty, I found myself at precipice of a new organization with an entrepreneurial founder, which is my jam. I love entrepreneurship. I love startup space. I love kind of like that soul bearing time where things can take those left and right turns I was talking about earlier as we are talking about career pathing, and been able to work with our founder and with this extraordinary team to build an organization that puts human flourishing at the center of our AI powered future. I'll stop there and hand it to Zachary.
Beautiful.
Yeah, kind of on the same note, but honestly, it came from circumstance that kind of developed and lit the fire for passion. Even back when I was in high school, having friends who really struggled with mental health crises and understanding really as I got older, just how much of an effect algorithms and the choices of some of these bigger companies in the tech space can really have on the downstream effects of their users and especially their younger users. So that brought me more into the space and realizing myself as a Canadian who's been really fortunate enough to work really across the border and across the pond, that most of these companies were headquartered in the US. So it led to a reprioritization of my end on finding ways and finding organizations that could really connect me directly with the work to going right to the source. And that's what drew me to Design It For Us, what drew me to then now to my own path where I'm starting my own organization and we're building under Youth United, making sure we can really build that unity, not just across borders, but also across subject areas and especially coalition building across partisan lines.
Ah, and what a beautiful transition for me talking about coalition building, Zach. So one major through line in both of your works is the idea of coalition building and strategic partnerships. So for listeners who may be newer to the tech advocacy space, what I found is that the field is very uniquely collaborative, interconnected, and relationship driven, largely because of leaders like both of you. So I'd love to hear from your perspectives on why coalition building matters so deeply in this work, what kind of progress or successes become possible when organizations and advocates choose that level of collaboration over that level of competition. We'll start with you, Zach, this time, then move to Laura.
For sure. I think at the root of it all is really trust. When you're working at such a high agency, but also a high purpose driven place that, sometimes there isn't necessarily the dollars behind certain initiatives and you have to kind of start in the shadows and work your way into the public eye. It's really about working with those partners and those collaborators who've been with you there through the thick and thin and making sure you're able to understand that the importance is that really these works does not have to be standalone, doesn't have to be siloed and making sure you're able to work with organizations in like-minded spaces, and especially reaching out in areas that you might not necessarily believe or even realize have connection and synergy. I think a big one for me has really been understanding just how many people, even just on the ground, who might not know about the subject, and considering it can be pretty deep, especially understanding more of the architecture behind some of these pushes. It means that we get to really do that great work of going to individuals, going to everyday people who don't have the time to really reflect and really engage, but now seeing, society really mobilize and really build momentum around these issues. It's really promising, I think, for the future where we don't just have support of like-minded organizations, but also the support of the masses and really the people in every country and every city around the world.
Absolutely. What about you, Laura?
I love what Zachary said about trust. It's the heart, right? And relationships are everything. Like every organization, every network, every community, everything is about relationships. And so coalitions are essentially just that, relationships. So coalition building matters because no single organization, sector, or even a theory of change is sufficient for the scale of the problem. Like the current digital ecosystem was built through a convergence of technical design and business incentives and public policy and capital markets and culture and user behavior, and changing it will require that same equally broad response. So we need technologists who can build a different infrastructure than we have today. We need policymakers who can create the guardrails and incentives. We need researchers who can tell us what is happening with like rigor.
Hmm.
I love that you worked at McGill, the center, Zachary. I love that. We need young people and parents and educators and communities who can speak from lived experience. We need philanthropists and funders and investors who can support work that may not produce immediate results, but it's
Hmm.
essential for long-term change. We need storytellers and cultural leaders. I really see your work, Emma, as part of that, and so much more that can make the issue legible to the public. Also, you need advocates who can diffuse concern into like focused pressure. The field needs to be collaborative because the problems are interconnected and the solutions need to be interconnected, period. End of story.
Absolutely. And I love that. It's interconnected, it's dispersed, it touches everyone. Whenever I talk with
Yes.
someone about my work, everyone has an entry point, whether that's fright over AI, whether that's, oh, I use social media too much than I would actually want to in my day-to-day.
Yes.
Everyone has an opinion. So it's very, I think, easy to get people to join not only intergenerational conversations, but just interdisciplinary conversations. And I think that Project
Yes.
has done a phenomenal job at that. And I think that we just need to continue to have and kind of curate those spaces where you're bringing all of those stakeholders together.
Yes. Agreed.
So
100%.
One other thing that I find really fascinating about tech advocacy is while many people agree that something is broken, there are often very, very different visions for what a healthier digital future should actually look like. And especially, I say digital future, a lot of my work has been in social media and a lot of the work at the center is in social media, but AI has to come into this conversation.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask both of you to just dream a little with me. From your, unique perspectives, what does a healthier ecosystem look like? What would social media technology and even AI look like if it were genuinely designed in service of people and communities rather than extraction and engagement? And perhaps more importantly, how are we realistically beginning to move towards a future like what you see? I'll start with you, Lauren. We'll move to Zach.
I love this question because it is if you can't see it, you can't build it, right? You don't have a destination. So the more precise, the better. And I also believe I want to make one other point, which is I don't think coalitions need to see eye to eye in everything. In fact, I
Mhm.
think it's healthy to have disagreement and for some coalitions to um, figure out where they have convergence points
Mhm.
rather than trying to make everything lockstep in bullseye because you won't get anywhere with that, right? So this is what I believe is a healthier digital, a better internet, a better digital future. And I think that there'll probably be some groups that see things in this and others who would see other things and disagree with other points. So for me, a healthier online ecosystem would begin from the premise, the core premise, and I think Emma, you would agree with this, that people are not raw material for engagement metrics,
Yep.
right? And our digital systems are designed, as we all know, all too well to capture attention, extract data, predict behavior, and keep people inside a walled garden, closed environments. And a healthier system would be designed around agency, dignity, back to that word trust, and just true human flourishing. And when you do that, it just looks differently, like how our tech is built, right? Um, what what the incentives are, like the experiences. It means from the Project Liberty point of view, this is really core to our being, which is that people should have more control over their data and their digital identity. Like
Mhm.
like lots of things can cascade when you do have that, which means interoperability is kind of very core to our better digital future. It means that communities have more say in the norms and governance of the spaces they inhabit, as you see in like a lot of public spaces. It means, or in democracies, it means that people aren't necessarily treated as an audience to be maximized, especially young people, but as human beings that are with developing minds and identities and relationships and civic instincts. Um, it means there's a whole other element as it relates to creators and public interest technology. I think would be more mainstream, not considered kind of fringe, but like actually core to a better internet. And I think that as it relates to AI specifically, it should be designed to expand human agency rather than narrow it. That means that AI tools should help people kind of like be something that is additive but not a replacement, and that humans should have more control over the AI tools out there. And that we should be really careful of AI systems that become too intimate or persuasive or too much embedded in our daily lives without transparency, accountability, without meaningful user control.
Mhm.
It goes back to those walled gardens. Um, and then a lot of transparency about how data is used and permissions, how memory works. I could go on and on, but I'll just stop there and throw it to Zachary to give your vision.
Yeah, no, all those points just reiterated, but especially understanding that to me in the last couple of years, watching, I guess, the progress in the movement, especially, that perfection is not really the goal. It's progress. And progress can sometimes be a little more important because perfection looks very different between people. And getting to that, I think disruption does not have to mean destruction. And overall, we can really reorient to understanding that there's different realities for different people, even in the same cities, the same neighborhoods. One solution for someone is destruction for another. I think it is that agency and that long-term freedom of choice and freedom of opportunity that will allow for us to all have our own necessarily perfect fixes to the current crises. Inside of that, I think the next steps obviously look towards making sure that we can create ideas that also work inside of capital markets, work bringing in larger groups, being a bigger tent advocacy pool, making sure there's ability to not just be inside of more niche, higher educated, higher connected, smaller groups, and making sure we're able to do that outreach. Because honestly, there's no point in time like today. We're seeing the first real wave of job loss, of really
Yes.
economic destruction, not creation, as much as they like to sell it. And really, it takes not just one government or one organization, but a big wave to really understand that this is the moment that we look to maybe 20, 30 years from now to see what's next. So I'm really hopeful, and there's a lot of good signs, even at the darkest moments before the light. But I do think it has to be understood that one solution is not a solution for everyone. It requires collaboration, consensus sometimes, but also a common ground and sometimes disagreement. So looking forward to it.
And I loved how you ended that, specifically you saying that you're optimistic. I think oftentimes, this can be a pretty jarring space. You already talked about some of the economic loss and the displacement that we've seen thus far, and the fact that it's only going to get worse and only going to continue, I think can be very frightening to a lot of people, specifically Gen Z and those who are looking for jobs in the coming years. But, I usually want to end on that techno optimistic note because I am a techno optimist at my core. So I'm going to ask both of you, what gives you hope in today's social media world slash space? What like lights your fire and keeps it burning, even during some of the darker days? Because we know that this is a David and Goliath issue. We've talked about how much money these big tech companies, social media, and AI have. And oftentimes it can feel so overwhelming and tiring and grim. So just give listeners just a little bit to grab onto during those darker, harder days, starting with you, Zach.
Yeah, I think for as many reasons that we have to be fearful about the future, I do truly believe that we have just as many reasons to be hopeful. Whether it's medicine, whether it's agriculture, whether it's even energy production and energy optimization for sufficiency, there's long-term sustainability that is possible as long as we realize not everything has to come down to a bottom line and really reorganizing how we see profit, how we see people, and how we see our idea of the workforce. Just as just as the telephone operator found their job replaced, it doesn't have to mean that some jobs out there it's going to be the best for them, but it also will mean long term. It allows people to hopefully shift more towards areas and focuses that are really in their own passion areas. And I do think for our generation specifically, we're kind of over-indexed on fear. When I do
Yeah.
think it's important now more than ever to see that do we really think that the status quo is working for us? And I think with more agency and more personal autonomy, there can be a future, especially with realignment, I think globally and especially in North America around what we want to see. And I do really hope that we can whether look to technology from more progressive countries or especially from organizations that there doesn't have to be one solution that fits everyone. And I do think that over time, we will naturally see smaller companies that are able to just really disrupt larger players because some of those larger players are just forced into profit incentive margins that just can't adapt to people who, refuse. We've seen with Anthropic pulling over ChatGPT and OpenAI with their work. It can truly be sometimes up to the consensus and up to the everyday person to make that call. And I do think people are realizing with movements like Scott Galloway that there are ways that you can actually make that choice yourself and it can be reflected. And I think corporations are starting to realize that.
And close us out, Laura.
It's funny while we're talking, there's been like a lot of sunlight in my eyes, and I'm like, this is very ironic. We're talking about hope and a brighter future, and I'm like being blinded over here by a really bright sunny day. But actually, Emma, I'll say what gives me hope. I'll start with you because I met you a few years ago. You were in college. Were you a junior when I met you? I'm not exactly sure, but it was a number of years ago. And I remember meeting you, and I was just absolutely floored by your sophisticated understanding of the problem, determination around being a force for the solution, not afraid to kind of really share openly, really, really also flexible around the different pathways to get there, but determined around um, the outcomes that you're looking for. And now that I'm hearing Zachary, same thing. Like, that's what we need. We need more people like you two to join in. And I do think that that is happening. So the conversation in just a few years has absolutely, completely changed. I feel like people like data, own data, like control data. What? Who cares? I don't care if the internet has every little piece on me. And oh, I don't care if I, post 1,000 pictures of my child online, like, and people are starting to get it. And when people, the general public, uh, when there's heightened awareness, like this crescendo of like heightened awareness with national security issues, with feeling the pain a little bit more, and with in some ways like an understanding of who the enemy is, not to say that like people are the enemy, but the system, or even in some cases organizations, companies, that's when things start to tilt. And so I see that this is not technologists only talking to technologists, but parents are involved, young people are involved, policymakers are involved. I've met extraordinary state legislators all around the United States who are just like putting forward some model bills that are really, really important, learning from each other, creating communities within their different various niches. I see the absolutely amazing researchers in universities who are showing up for, like, from a technical point of view, what like a trusted fiduciary for this agentic AI future looks like. I also see a lot of artists who are using
Mhm.
their craft to bring another way of seeing a better future, or even a critique of our status quo, and journalists who are doing really hard, long form, incredibly important, story driven work on helping to create that kind of level setting, so people have deeper understandings. And so all those little elements together, again, it goes back to the answer to my first question, which is that it's not just one group. It is like lots of different constituencies bringing what they can to the fore. And what is needed, and this is why I'm so excited about some of the work that Project Liberty is doing, and others, like both of your organizations too, is that bringing their unique genius forward. And in our case, what we're excited about is kind of, there's so many organizations in the AI safety, pro-human AI space, but not enough collaboration and coordination amongst them. What would it look like if there was an extra layer of support and shared services and acceleration and learning together and doing together that can help move organizations from the kind of like, I know you, I see you at conferences, sometimes once or twice a year we get on the phone and share a few things, to actually, I know you, like I really know you. It's that trust thing again, Zachary. And you, because that's what's needed to get to collaboration.
Mhm.
Organizations by default are to perpetuate the mission of that individual organization, what makes it very hard to collaborate. And the only way we're going to get into the other side of a safer, better, pro-human AI future is if we are figuring out how to work better together, and so that we can have exponential impact.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to something that you both have reiterated again, time and time again. Trust is just such a monumentally important force here. And I'm
Yes.
just so glad that you both trusted me and SMC to talk to you about this important topic and to kind of talk us through your dreams of a healthier online environment. So very thankful for both of you for sharing your insights with us today. And as always, we look forward to being in continued conversation with the SMC community, and we will speak with you again next week. So thank you both for coming on.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Emma. Great to meet
Yeah.
you, Laura.